What if your biggest problem is not your circumstances, your schedule, or your lack of motivation, but the way your mind responds to everyday situations? Every day, you make small decisions. You check your phone when you should be working. You delay important tasks because they feel uncomfortable. You react when you are angry. You spend money when you are stressed. You promise yourself that tomorrow will be different, then repeat the same behavior. This audiobook will help you understand why these patterns happen and, more importantly, what you can do about them. You will learn how to control your attention, challenge negative thoughts, build consistent routines, manage emotions, delay immediate rewards, take responsibility, protect your time, and stay disciplined when motivation disappears. You will get practical ideas you can use immediately in your daily life. If you are serious about becoming more disciplined and taking control of your choices, stay until the end. And if you want more practical self-improvement audiobooks, subscribe to the channel and begin listening now. Chapter 1. Identify the mental habits that quietly control your daily decisions. You may think you are making your own decisions all day, but many of your decisions happen before you consciously think about them. You wake up and reach for your phone. You check messages before deciding whether you actually need to. You delay an important task because it feels uncomfortable. You eat something you did not plan to eat because you feel stressed. You stay up later than you intended because you want a little more entertainment after a difficult day. None of these choices may seem serious by themselves. The problem begins when the same choices happen repeatedly. Eventually, they become normal. You stop asking why you are doing them because the behavior feels automatic. This is where discipline becomes important. Before you can control your actions, you have to notice what is controlling them. Your mind develops patterns through repetition, and those patterns can influence your attention, emotions, habits, and decisions without asking for your permission. A mental habit is simply a repeated way of responding to a situation. When something difficult appears, perhaps your first response is to avoid it. When someone criticizes you, perhaps you immediately become defensive. When you feel tired, perhaps you tell yourself that tomorrow will be better. When you feel anxious about an uncertain decision, perhaps you keep researching instead of choosing. When you feel bored, perhaps you automatically look for stimulation. These responses are not necessarily signs of weak character, they are learned patterns. Your brain prefers familiar responses because they require less conscious effort. That makes repeated behavior convenient, but convenience does not mean that the behavior is good for you. A person can become highly skilled at avoiding difficult work, postponing uncomfortable conversations, seeking approval, or distracting themselves from their own thoughts. The behavior becomes easier with repetition, even when the consequences become worse. Consider someone who repeatedly postpones an important project. The problem may not begin with laziness. It may begin with a thought such as, "I need to feel ready before I start." The project feels difficult, so the person checks email, cleans the room, watches a few videos, or handles smaller tasks. For a short time, the discomfort decreases. That relief teaches the mind something important. Avoiding the difficult task feels better immediately. The next time the project appears, the same response becomes easier. Eventually, the person may describe themselves as someone who cannot stay disciplined, but the deeper problem is the repeated connection between discomfort and avoidance. If you do not identify that pattern, you may keep trying to solve it with motivation while continuing to practice the behavior that created the problem. This is why awareness must come before correction. You cannot change a habit that you rarely notice. Start paying attention to the moments when you make choices that you later regret. Do not immediately judge yourself. Instead, examine what happened just before the decision. What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What did you want to avoid? What reward did the choice give you in that moment? A person who spends an hour scrolling may not have been looking for entertainment alone. They may have been trying to escape boredom, stress, uncertainty, or the pressure of an unfinished responsibility. If you only focus on the phone, you may miss the real issue. The useful question is not simply, why do I waste time? It is, what feeling or thought makes wasting time attractive right now? That question gives you something you can actually work with. Your emotional reactions also deserve careful attention, because emotions can quietly become decision makers. Feeling angry can make a harsh response seem reasonable. Feeling insecure can make approval seem necessary. Feeling tired can make a poor choice seem harmless. Feeling overwhelmed can make avoidance feel practical. The emotion itself is not the enemy. Emotions provide information, but they do not automatically provide good instructions. Discipline means creating enough space between the feeling and the action to decide what should happen next. If you are angry, you do not have to send the message immediately. If you are anxious, you do not have to cancel the plan. If you are discouraged, you do not have to abandon the goal. You can acknowledge the feeling without allowing it to determine the behavior. This distinction becomes especially important when your mind produces convincing explanations for what you want to do. The mind is very good at creating reasons after a decision has already become attractive. You might say, "I deserve a break," when you have already spent several hours avoiding your responsibility. You might say, "I work better under pressure," when repeated delays have become familiar. You might say, "This is not the right time," when the real problem is that beginning feels uncomfortable. These statements may sometimes be true, but they deserve examination. The disciplined person does not automatically believe every thought simply because it sounds reasonable. Instead, they ask whether the thought is helping them act according to their values or helping them escape immediate discomfort. One practical way to develop this awareness is to keep a simple record for several days. When you notice yourself making a decision that conflicts with what you intended to do, pause and write down the situation in plain language. Record what happened, what you felt, what you wanted to do, what you actually did, and what happened afterward. Do not turn this into an exercise in self-criticism. You are collecting evidence about your own behavior. After several days, patterns may become visible. Perhaps you avoid difficult work when your phone is nearby. Perhaps you become impulsive when you are tired. Perhaps you agree to things because saying no makes you uncomfortable. Perhaps you become distracted whenever a task requires sustained concentration. These observations are valuable because discipline improves when your decisions are based on facts rather than vague assumptions about yourself. You should also pay attention to the situations in which you behave differently. If you can concentrate for an hour at work but cannot concentrate for 10 minutes at home, there may be environmental factors involved. If you exercise consistently when someone expects you to be there, but regularly skip workouts when nobody knows, accountability may influence your behavior. If you make better food choices when you plan ahead, but struggle when you are hungry, preparation may matter more than willpower. These details show that discipline is not only about having stronger intentions, it is also about understanding the conditions that make certain behaviors easier or harder. Once you know those conditions, you can change them instead of repeatedly blaming yourself. There is another mental habit that deserves attention: making decisions based on your current identity. If you repeatedly tell yourself, "I am not disciplined," you may begin treating that statement as a fact rather than a description of past behavior. Then every failure becomes evidence that the identity is correct. A missed workout becomes proof. A delayed project becomes proof. Another night of poor decisions becomes proof. This creates a cycle in which your expectations influence your actions. A more accurate approach is to separate your identity from your current habits. You may have a pattern of avoiding difficult tasks, but that does not mean avoidance is your permanent character. You may have struggled with self-control, but struggle does not remove your ability to practice control today. Responsibility becomes more useful when it describes what you can change rather than condemning who you are. The Stoic approach to discipline begins with this kind of responsibility. You cannot control every event, every person's behavior, or every feeling that appears in your mind. You can, however, become more deliberate about your response. That does not mean becoming emotionally cold or perfectly controlled. It means refusing to give every impulse equal authority. You can notice anger and choose your words. You can notice fear and still take the necessary step. You can notice the desire for comfort and decide whether comfort should come first. The goal is not to eliminate human reactions. The goal is to stop treating every reaction as a command. Once you begin observing your mental habits, an important change occurs. You stop seeing every decision as an isolated event. You begin seeing connections between thoughts, emotions, actions, and consequences. The decision to check your phone affects your attention. Your attention affects your work. Your unfinished work affects your stress. Your stress affects your evening choices. Your evening choices affect your sleep. Your sleep affects the next morning. A small, repeated decision can influence many later decisions. This is why the habits you barely notice deserve serious attention. Your life is shaped not only by major choices, but also by the ordinary choices you make when nobody is watching. The purpose of this chapter is not to make you suspicious of every thought or afraid of every habit. It is to help you become more observant. Before you can discipline your mind, you need to know what your mind repeatedly does. Notice the first impulse. Notice the excuse that appears. Notice the emotion that makes a certain choice attractive. Notice the behavior that gives immediate relief but creates a later problem. Then ask yourself a direct question. Is this choice serving the person I want to become, or is it simply giving me what feels easiest right now? You may not always choose perfectly. That is not the standard. The standard is becoming increasingly aware before you act. Because once you can recognize the patterns controlling your decisions, you face a more difficult challenge. Your attention itself can be trained or captured. You can understand your habits perfectly and still lose hours to distractions if you cannot decide where your mind should remain. The next step, therefore, is not simply to notice what controls your behavior. It is to learn how to control your attention before everything around you begins deciding what deserves it. Chapter 2: Control your attention before distractions determine what matters most. You can have clear goals, good intentions, and enough time, yet still finish the day wondering where your attention went. The problem is often not that you lacked time. It is that your attention was repeatedly redirected. A notification appears, you check it. A message arrives, you answer it. A new video catches your interest, so you watch it. You open your computer to complete an important task and suddenly find yourself reading unrelated information. By evening, you may have been busy for hours without spending much time on what actually mattered. This is one of the most important problems of modern life, because your attention determines what you experience, what you remember, what you learn, and what you eventually accomplish. If you do not decide where your attention belongs, other people, devices, entertainment, and immediate demands will make those decisions for you. Attention is limited, and that limitation changes how you should think about your day. You cannot give equal mental energy to everything that asks for it. Every notification may be small, but each interruption creates a decision. Should you respond? Should you ignore it? Should you check again later? Even when you decide not to engage, part of your mind has already processed the interruption. This becomes especially costly when you are working on something that requires concentration. A person writing a report may need only a few seconds to look at a notification, but returning fully to the original task can take much longer. The damage is not simply the time spent looking at the screen, it is the loss of mental continuity. This explains why some people feel mentally exhausted despite completing relatively few important tasks. Their attention has been divided throughout the day. They move between messages, work, social media, conversations, news, entertainment, and unfinished responsibilities. Each activity demands a small adjustment. By the end of the day, the mind has spent hours changing direction. The result can feel like fatigue without satisfaction. You may have answered dozens of messages and still feel that nothing meaningful was completed. The solution is not necessarily to work longer. It is to reduce unnecessary switching and give your best attention to fewer things at a time. One of the most useful changes you can make is to stop treating every incoming demand as equally urgent. Someone sending you a message does not automatically make the message important. An email arriving does not mean it deserves an immediate response. A notification is an invitation to look, not an instruction that you must obey. This distinction gives you back decision-making authority. Before responding to an interruption, ask whether it requires attention now, later, or not at all. That simple pause prevents other people's schedules from becoming the structure of your day. Your environment also influences your attention more than many people realize. If your phone is beside you while you work, you do not need to be consciously thinking about it for it to affect you. Its presence creates the possibility of interruption. If multiple browser tabs are open, each one represents another possible direction. If your workspace is filled with unrelated materials, your mind has more opportunities to shift. Discipline becomes easier when the environment supports the behavior you want. Put the phone somewhere you cannot casually reach it. Close unnecessary applications. Keep only the material needed for the current task in front of you. These actions may seem simple, but they remove decisions that would otherwise compete for your attention. There is also a deeper reason distractions are difficult to resist. Many distractions provide immediate mental stimulation with almost no effort. You do not need to solve a difficult problem to watch a short video. You do not need to tolerate uncertainty to refresh a social feed. You do not need to concentrate deeply to read another headline. The mind naturally notices things that are new, emotionally charged, or easy to process. Important work often has the opposite qualities. It may be repetitive, uncertain, demanding, or slow to reward you. This creates a conflict between what feels engaging now and what matters over time. Discipline requires you to recognize that difference without expecting every valuable activity to feel interesting. Think about studying for an important exam. You may genuinely want the result, but after 20 minutes of difficult reading, your mind becomes restless. You check your phone and immediately feel more engaged. The problem is not that the phone became more important than your future. The problem is that the phone offered immediate stimulation while studying required sustained effort. If you repeatedly respond to that discomfort by switching activities, you train yourself to leave whenever concentration becomes difficult. If instead you remain with the material for another 10 minutes, then another 10, you are practicing something much more valuable than studying. You are teaching yourself that discomfort does not automatically require escape. This is why focused attention should be trained gradually. Do not begin by demanding several hours of perfect concentration. Choose one meaningful task and create a defined period in which you will give it your full attention. Start with 20 or 30 minutes if necessary. During that period, keep a piece of paper nearby for unrelated thoughts. When you suddenly remember something you need to do, write it down instead of acting on it. If you think of a website you want to visit, record it and return to the task. This allows your mind to acknowledge the thought without following it. Over time, you will become better at letting thoughts appear without turning every thought into an action. Another useful practice is deciding your most important task before the day becomes crowded. If you wait until the afternoon to decide what deserves serious attention, smaller demands may already have consumed your best mental energy. Choose one important responsibility early. It might be completing a work assignment, studying, exercising, preparing for a difficult conversation, or handling an important personal responsibility. Then protect a period of your day for it. This is not about making a perfect schedule. It is about making a clear decision before distractions have a chance to make the decision for you. You also need to understand the difference between being informed and being constantly exposed to information. Many people repeatedly check news, messages, social media, and online discussions because they fear missing something important. But continuous exposure does not necessarily create better judgment. It can create mental noise. You may begin carrying dozens of unresolved opinions and concerns that have nothing to do with your immediate responsibilities. Give information a specific place in your day instead of allowing it to occupy every quiet moment. When you control when you consume information, you become more capable of choosing what deserves thought. Attention also affects relationships. Imagine talking to someone you care about while checking your phone every few minutes. You may believe you are listening, but your attention is divided. The other person can usually notice. Being physically present is not the same as being mentally present. Giving someone your full attention communicates that the conversation matters. It also improves your ability to understand what the person is actually saying, rather than preparing your next response while half listening. Self-control is not only about productivity. It affects the quality of your relationships because attention is one of the clearest ways you demonstrate that something matters to you. There will be days when your concentration is poor. You will feel tired. Your mind will wander. You will want stimulation. The disciplined response is not to demand that your mind behave perfectly. It is to return to the task each time you notice that you have left it. That return is the practice. You do not need to feel focused before you begin focusing. You begin, notice the distraction, and return. Then you do it again. This process may feel ordinary, but it develops a powerful form of self-command because you are learning that your attention can be redirected by choice. Eventually, you may notice that controlling your attention changes how you experience time. A quiet hour spent doing one meaningful thing feels different from an hour divided among 10 small distractions. You remember more. You make fewer careless decisions. You experience less pressure because important work is actually moving forward. More importantly, you begin to recognize that your attention is connected to your priorities. Whatever receives your attention repeatedly will occupy a larger place in your life, whether you consciously chose it or not. That realization creates an important responsibility. If you spend hours consuming content about other people's lives, you are giving those lives a portion of your limited attention. If you spend your evenings reacting to messages, you are allowing other people's demands to shape your evening. If you repeatedly give your best concentration to trivial activities and your leftover energy to important responsibilities, your daily choices are already revealing what controls you. The question is whether those choices reflect what you actually value. Learning to control attention is therefore not about becoming productive every minute. It is about becoming deliberate about what receives your mind. You need periods of rest, conversation, entertainment, and simple activities. The difference is that these things should be chosen rather than automatically consumed whenever you feel a moment of discomfort or boredom. A disciplined mind does not reject pleasure. It decides when pleasure belongs. But even when you learn to control your attention, another problem remains. You can focus perfectly on the wrong thing. You can become highly consistent while pursuing goals that do not deserve your time. You can protect your schedule and still make decisions based on impulse, fear, or immediate reward. So the next stage of discipline requires something deeper than attention. It requires learning how to examine the thoughts that appear in your mind and decide which ones deserve your trust. Chapter 3: Challenge negative thoughts before they influence your choices. A thought can appear in your mind in less than a second and still influence an entire day. You receive a short message from your manager and immediately think, "I must have done something wrong." Someone walks past you without saying hello, and you think, "They must be upset with me." You make one mistake and tell yourself, "I always ruin things." You consider starting something important and hear, "I probably will not succeed anyway." None of these thoughts require permission to appear. They simply arrive. The important question is what happens next. If you accept every negative thought as an accurate description of reality, it can influence your emotions, your confidence, your behavior, and eventually the decisions you make. Mental discipline requires something more than positive thinking. It requires learning to examine your thoughts before allowing them to become instructions. Negative thinking often feels convincing because it is connected to emotion. When you feel embarrassed, the thought that everyone noticed your mistake may seem obvious. When you feel rejected, the belief that nobody values you may feel completely true. When you are afraid, the prediction that something will go badly can seem like careful preparation rather than fear. The emotional intensity makes the thought feel reliable, but emotional intensity and factual accuracy are not the same thing. A thought can feel urgent without being correct. This is why disciplined thinking begins with a simple separation. What happened, what you interpreted, and what you decided it means are three different things. Imagine that you send a friend a message and receive no response for several hours. The fact is simple. There has been no reply. Everything beyond that is interpretation. You may think they are angry. You may assume you said something wrong. You may decide they no longer care about the friendship. You may even begin planning how to respond to their supposed rejection, yet you do not actually know why they have not answered. They could be working, driving, sleeping, dealing with a family problem, or simply away from their phone. The mind dislikes uncertainty, so it often creates an explanation quickly. The problem is that an explanation can become a belief before evidence appears. This habit becomes more serious when you repeatedly interpret uncertain situations in the most negative way. Over time, your mind begins expecting rejection, failure, criticism, or disappointment. You may become cautious in situations that do not require caution. You may avoid opportunities because you predict embarrassment. You may become defensive before anyone has criticized you. You may withdraw from people because you expect them to leave. In this way, negative thoughts do not merely affect how you feel about life. They can influence your behavior in ways that create the very outcomes you feared. There is a practical difference between recognizing a real problem and assuming the worst about it. If your performance at work has declined and your manager tells you there are specific issues, you have useful information. You can respond by examining the problems and improving your performance. But if your manager asks to speak with you and you spend the entire morning imagining that you are about to lose your job, you are suffering from a conclusion that has not yet been established. Mental discipline does not require you to ignore possible problems. It requires you to respond to evidence rather than treating every fear as evidence. One of the strongest ways to challenge negative thinking is to ask what you actually know. When a difficult thought appears, slow it down. What happened? What evidence supports my interpretation? What evidence does not support it? Is there another reasonable explanation? What would I advise someone I care about if they were thinking this way? These questions create distance between the initial thought and your final judgment. You are not trying to convince yourself that everything will be fine. You are trying to reach a more accurate conclusion. This matters because unrealistic optimism can be just as unhelpful as constant negativity. If you have ignored your finances for months, telling yourself that everything will somehow work out does not solve the problem. If you have failed to prepare for an important responsibility, saying that you will definitely succeed does not replace preparation. A disciplined mind seeks accuracy. Sometimes the accurate conclusion will be uncomfortable. You may discover that you handled a situation poorly. You may need to apologize. You may need to change a habit. You may need to accept that a relationship is not healthy or that a goal requires more work than you expected. Facing an unpleasant truth is often more useful than protecting yourself with comforting thoughts. Negative thoughts also become dangerous when they turn a single event into a permanent identity. You fail an exam and think, "I am stupid." You lose an opportunity and think, "I am a failure." You make a poor financial decision and think, "I cannot be trusted with money." These statements move from behavior to identity. Once the problem becomes part of your identity, improvement becomes harder because every future mistake seems to confirm it. A healthier form of responsibility is more specific. I prepared poorly for this exam. I made a bad financial decision. I handled that conversation badly. Specific language gives you a problem you can work on. Global self-condemnation gives you nowhere to go. The same principle applies to thoughts about other people. If someone disagrees with you, it is easy to decide that they are disrespectful. If someone succeeds where you struggled, you may assume they had advantages you did not have. If someone criticizes your work, you may conclude that they dislike you. These interpretations can protect your ego because they place the problem outside yourself. But they can also prevent learning. Before deciding that someone is unfair, ask whether their criticism contains information you need. Before deciding that another person's success is undeserved, ask what they did that you could learn from. Responsibility becomes stronger when you can receive useful information without immediately defending your self-image. A useful practice is to change the language you use inside your own mind. Instead of saying, "I cannot handle this," say, "I am having difficulty handling this right now." Instead of, "This always happens to me," describe the actual event. Instead of, "Everyone thinks I am incompetent," ask what evidence you have for that conclusion. This is not about forcing yourself to speak positively. It is about speaking precisely. Precision reduces unnecessary emotional intensity because you are no longer adding assumptions to the facts. You should also become careful with predictions. The mind often treats future possibilities as if they are already happening. You imagine the conversation going badly, so you feel anxious before the conversation begins. You imagine failing at a new project, so you lose motivation before making a serious attempt. You imagine being judged, so you avoid participating. Ask yourself whether you are preparing for a likely outcome or rehearsing a feared outcome. Preparation leads to action. Rehearsing fear often leads to avoidance. If a difficult event is genuinely possible, identify what you can control and prepare for that. Do not spend your energy trying to control every possible outcome. This is where a stoic approach becomes practical. Your responsibility is not to guarantee a particular result. Your responsibility is to choose your response carefully. You can prepare for an interview, but you cannot control whether the company hires you. You can speak honestly, but you cannot control whether another person understands you. You can do your work carefully, but you cannot control every reaction to it. When your mind becomes obsessed with uncontrollable outcomes, Anxiety grows because it keeps demanding certainty that reality cannot provide. Discipline means returning your attention to the part of the situation where your choices actually matter. There will also be times when your negative thoughts contain an important warning. Maybe you really are neglecting a responsibility. Maybe you really have been avoiding a difficult conversation. Maybe your behavior is damaging someone's trust. Challenging negative thoughts does not mean rejecting criticism simply because it feels uncomfortable. It means examining the thought honestly enough to determine whether it contains truth. If it does, use that truth. If it does not, release the unnecessary conclusion. In both cases, the goal is the same: accurate thinking followed by deliberate action. The more you practice this, the more quickly you will notice the difference between a thought and a decision. A thought says, "This will probably go badly." A decision says, "I will not prepare because I expect failure." A thought says, "They probably dislike me." A decision says, "I will avoid them." A thought says, "I am not capable of this." A decision says, "I will not try." The first event may be automatic. The second is where your responsibility becomes much clearer. You may not control the first sentence that appears in your mind, but you can become more careful about the conclusions you build from it. This skill changes more than your mood. It changes the quality of your choices. When your thinking becomes more accurate, you become less reactive. You can receive criticism without immediately collapsing or attacking. You can experience uncertainty without inventing an answer. You can make a mistake without turning it into a judgment about your entire character. You can face a difficult situation without adding unnecessary fear to it. That is a serious form of self-control, because your actions become less dependent on whatever thought happens to appear first. But there is another difficulty waiting beneath all of this. Even when you recognize a negative thought and know it is unreasonable, you may still feel pulled toward the familiar behavior that follows it. Knowing what is rational does not automatically make doing it easy. Your mind may understand that a difficult task matters while your habits continue choosing comfort. That is where discipline moves from thinking into repeated action. The next step is learning how to build routines that make the behavior you respect easier to practice every day. Chapter 4. Build consistent routines that strengthen discipline through daily action. Discipline becomes much easier to understand when you stop asking whether you feel motivated and start asking what you repeatedly do. A person can spend hours thinking about becoming more organized, healthier, focused, or responsible, yet still make very little progress if their daily behavior remains unchanged. Real change usually becomes visible through ordinary actions repeated often enough to become familiar. You wake up at a consistent time. You complete an important task before unnecessary entertainment. You prepare what you need the night before. You keep promises that you make to yourself. You return to your responsibilities even when the day is inconvenient. None of these actions seems dramatic. That is precisely why they matter. Discipline is developed through repeated decisions that gradually make responsible behavior more normal. A routine reduces the number of decisions you need to make when your energy is limited. Imagine two people who both want to exercise. One decides each morning whether to work out based on how they feel. The other has already chosen specific days and a specific time. The first person repeatedly negotiates with themselves. The second person follows a decision that was made earlier. That difference matters because self-control is not equally strong at every moment. After a stressful day, you may be much more likely to choose comfort than responsibility. A routine protects you from having to make the same decision again when your resistance is strongest. This does not mean that every part of your life needs to be scheduled. Excessive structure can become another source of stress. The purpose of a routine is to create reliable patterns around the behaviors that matter most. If reading is important, decide when reading normally happens. If exercise matters, establish a regular time. If you want to make progress on a difficult project, reserve a consistent period for it. The specific routine should fit your actual life, rather than an imaginary version of your life in which you have unlimited energy and perfect concentration. A routine that looks impressive but cannot survive an ordinary Tuesday is not useful. One reason people fail with routines is that they start with too much. They decide to wake up early, exercise for an hour, read 30 pages, eat perfectly, work without distractions, journal, and sleep at a fixed time all at once. The first few days may feel exciting because the plan creates a strong sense of possibility. Then reality appears. Work takes longer, sleep is poor, an unexpected responsibility arrives, one part of the routine is missed, and the person concludes that the entire plan has failed. A better approach is to build one dependable behavior before adding another. Reliability matters more than intensity in the early stages. Consider someone who wants to develop a reading habit. Instead of deciding to read 50 pages every night, they could choose 10 pages after dinner. 10 pages may seem small, but the real goal is not the number of pages. The goal is creating a stable connection between a certain part of the day and a deliberate behavior. Once that behavior becomes familiar, increasing the amount becomes easier. The same principle applies to exercise, writing, studying, saving money, and other forms of personal improvement. Start at a level you can maintain when motivation is low, then gradually increase the demand. A useful routine also needs a clear starting point. Vague intentions are easy to postpone. I will work on my goals today is difficult to act on because it does not tell you what to do or when to begin. At 8 in the morning, I will spend 30 minutes writing at my desk, creates a specific action. The more clearly you define the beginning, the less room there is for negotiation. You do not need to spend time deciding what the behavior means every day. The decision has already been made. The physical environment can support this process. If you want to exercise in the morning, prepare your clothes before going to bed. If you want to study after work, keep your materials ready. If you want to eat more intentionally, decide what you will prepare before hunger becomes intense. If you want to reduce late-night phone use, keep the device away from your bed. These adjustments do not replace self-control. They make responsible choices easier to execute. A disciplined person should not constantly create unnecessary tests of willpower. Good systems reduce avoidable friction. There is another important part of routine building: deciding what happens after you fail to follow the routine. This matters because no routine survives perfectly. You will oversleep, you will miss a workout, you will lose focus, you will have a difficult week. The dangerous response is to treat one failure as proof that the routine does not work. Then one missed day becomes several missed days. Instead, define your response before failure occurs. If you miss one morning workout, return to the schedule at the next available opportunity. If you skip reading one night, continue the following night. You do not need to punish yourself or compensate with an extreme effort. You need to resume. This approach develops a healthier relationship with discipline. Discipline is not the ability to perform perfectly. It is the ability to continue behaving responsibly when conditions are imperfect. If your routine only works when you are rested, calm, motivated, and free from unexpected problems, then it has not yet become strong enough for real life. A useful routine should have a normal version and a reduced version. On a good day, you may exercise for 40 minutes. On a difficult day, you may exercise for 10. The reduced version keeps the behavior connected to your identity and prevents temporary difficulty from becoming permanent abandonment. Tracking your actions can also reveal whether your routine is actually working. You do not need an elaborate system. A simple record can show whether you followed through. The purpose is not to create pressure around every missed day. It is to replace vague impressions with information. Someone may believe they exercise almost every day when the actual number is twice a week. Another person may think they never make progress on a project while completing several focused sessions each week. Measurement creates clarity. It also helps you adjust a routine based on evidence instead of emotion. You should pay attention to the relationship between your routines and your energy. A behavior placed at the wrong time may repeatedly fail even though the behavior itself is reasonable. If you are mentally exhausted at night, trying to do your hardest intellectual work at 10 o'clock may be unrealistic. If mornings are consistently rushed, creating a complicated morning routine may increase frustration. Discipline includes honest assessment. You are not trying to prove that you can follow an impossible schedule. You are trying to create conditions in which important behavior can happen consistently. Routines also influence how you see yourself, but this needs to be understood carefully. Every time you follow through on a small commitment, you create evidence that your intentions can become actions. Every time you repeatedly ignore a commitment, you create evidence in the opposite direction. This is why keeping small promises matters. If you tell yourself you will spend 20 minutes studying and you repeatedly do it, you begin to trust your own decisions more. That trust is not created by repeating positive statements. It is created by observable behavior. The Stoic perspective is useful here because it places emphasis on what you can control today. You cannot guarantee that a routine will produce the exact result you want. You cannot control every interruption, illness, delay, or unexpected responsibility. You can control whether you make a reasonable plan and whether you return to it when circumstances allow. Your responsibility is to perform the next appropriate action. That sounds simple, but it changes the way you relate to long-term goals. Instead of constantly asking how far you are from the final result, you focus on whether today's behavior deserves your own respect. There is also a quiet danger in becoming too attached to routines. A routine is a tool, not a moral achievement. If circumstances change, you may need to adjust it. Travel, family responsibilities, work demands, and other real conditions may require flexibility. The disciplined person is not the person who follows a schedule regardless of reality. The disciplined person can preserve the underlying priority while changing the method. If you cannot complete your usual workout, perhaps you walk. If you cannot study for an hour, perhaps you study for 20 minutes. If your normal work period disappears, perhaps you complete one essential part later. Consistency should mean staying committed to the principle, not becoming rigid about every detail. Over time, the most valuable effect of a routine is that fewer decisions depend on your mood. You stop asking whether you feel like doing the important thing. You begin recognizing that certain actions simply belong to your life because you have decided they matter. This does not eliminate resistance. There will still be mornings when you want to stay in bed and evenings when entertainment feels easier than responsibility. But the decision has become more stable than the feeling. That is a significant development in self-control. Yet, there is one problem that routines alone cannot solve. You can follow a schedule and still be controlled by your impulses. You can complete your planned work and then spend the rest of the evening giving in to every immediate desire. You can have a disciplined morning and an undisciplined afternoon. Eventually, you have to confront the part of the mind that wants immediate satisfaction even when you know the long-term cost. The next stage of discipline begins there, with your ability to wait, choose, and tolerate the discomfort of not getting what you want immediately. Chapter 5. Delay immediate rewards to develop stronger control over impulses. You know the difference between what you want right now and what you want your life to look like later, yet the immediate choice can still win. You intend to save money, but you buy something because it feels satisfying in the moment. You plan to eat carefully, but you order food because you are tired. You decide to finish your work before watching anything, but you tell yourself that one episode will help you relax. You promise yourself that you will sleep early, then continue using your phone because you are not ready for the day to end. These decisions often appear harmless, especially when considered one at a time. The deeper problem is that repeated immediate rewards can train you to value what feels good now more than what serves you later. If you want stronger self-control, you have to become comfortable with waiting. The desire for immediate reward is not a sign that something is wrong with you. Human beings naturally pay attention to rewards that are available now. A benefit that can be experienced immediately feels more certain than a benefit that may arrive months from today. Saving money requires giving up something today for greater financial flexibility later. Studying requires effort now for a result that may not appear until an exam. Exercise requires discomfort now for improved health over time. The mind can understand the long-term benefit while still feeling strongly attracted to the immediate option. Discipline begins when you recognize that understanding and preference are not always the same thing. This is why simply telling yourself to make better choices often fails. When an impulse appears, the immediate reward has already become emotionally attractive. You may know that scrolling for another hour will make tomorrow harder, but in that moment, scrolling offers relief, stimulation, and almost no effort. The rational part of your thinking is competing with a reward that is available instantly. If you repeatedly give in, the pattern becomes stronger. Your mind learns that whenever discomfort appears, relief is available if you act quickly enough. Over time, waiting itself can begin to feel unpleasant. The first practical skill is creating a pause between desire and action. The pause does not need to be long. If you want to make an unnecessary purchase, wait until tomorrow before buying it. If you want to respond angrily to a message, give yourself time before replying. If you want to abandon a difficult task, work for another 10 minutes before deciding whether you truly need a break. The purpose is not to deny every desire. The purpose is to prove that an impulse can exist without receiving an immediate response. That experience is important because it changes your relationship with desire. You begin to see that wanting something does not mean you need to act on it. Consider how this works with spending. You see a new pair of headphones and immediately imagine how useful they would be. You begin explaining to yourself why the purchase makes sense. Instead of asking whether you can afford them, you ask whether you want them. Those are different questions. A useful rule is to separate desire from decision by adding time. For smaller purchases, wait a day. For expensive purchases, wait longer. During that period, do not keep looking at the product. Give yourself enough distance to determine whether the desire remains after the initial excitement fades. Many unnecessary purchases become less attractive when the emotional urgency disappears. The same principle can improve eating habits. When you are hungry and tired, immediate satisfaction becomes much more persuasive. If you wait until you are extremely hungry before deciding what to eat, you have made self-control harder than necessary. Planning meals is therefore not only about organization. It reduces the number of moments when you must negotiate with a strong impulse. But even when the impulse appears, you can pause and ask what you actually need. Are you hungry, bored, stressed, or simply looking for a reward after a difficult day? The answer does not always require denying yourself food. It gives you better information about why you are choosing it. There is also a social form of impulse control that is easy to underestimate. You may feel the need to defend yourself immediately when someone criticizes you. You may want to correct someone the moment they say something inaccurate. You may want to prove that you were right during an argument. The immediate reward is emotional. You get the feeling that you have protected yourself or won the exchange, but the later cost may be unnecessary conflict, damaged trust, or words you regret. Delaying your response gives you time to decide whether speaking will improve the situation. Sometimes the strongest response is a calmer response. Sometimes you discover that no response is necessary at all. Waiting becomes easier when you give yourself something meaningful to do during the delay. If you simply sit and tell yourself not to think about the reward, your attention may remain fixed on it. Instead, redirect yourself toward another activity. Take a short walk, finish a small task, make tea, read several pages, continue working, contact someone you care about. The goal is not to distract yourself from life. It is to remind your mind that the desired reward is not the only source of satisfaction available. You can experience an urge without allowing that urge to occupy your entire mental space. Another powerful practice is deciding in advance what you will do when a predictable impulse appears. If you know you usually spend too much money after a stressful day, establish a rule before the stressful day arrives. If you tend to order unnecessary food when you are exhausted, prepare an alternative beforehand. If you lose an hour to entertainment after completing work, decide how much entertainment you will allow before you begin watching. Pre-decisions reduce negotiation. The important choice is made while your judgment is relatively calm, rather than when the reward is directly in front of you. You should also become aware of how frequently you reward yourself for discomfort. Some people have trained themselves to believe that every difficult task deserves an immediate reward. Finish 10 minutes of work, check social media, complete one responsibility, order something. Feel stressed, buy something, exercise, eat whatever you want. Rest is necessary, but if every unpleasant feeling is followed by immediate stimulation, your tolerance for ordinary discomfort becomes weaker. You begin expecting comfort as soon as something becomes difficult. Stronger self-control requires learning that discomfort can exist without needing to be removed immediately. This does not mean you should live without pleasure. That would be unnecessary and unrealistic. The goal is to choose pleasure rather than use pleasure automatically. There is a major difference between deciding to watch a movie after completing your responsibilities and watching videos for hours because you cannot tolerate being bored. There is a difference between buying something you genuinely value and purchasing objects whenever you feel emotionally uncomfortable. There is a difference between taking a day off because your body needs recovery and avoiding every difficult activity because effort feels unpleasant. The behavior may look similar from the outside, but the level of control is different. A useful exercise is to practice small delays that have no serious consequences. If you want to check your phone, wait 5 minutes. If you want another snack when you are not hungry, wait 10 minutes and reassess. If you want to interrupt someone, let them finish speaking. If you want to complain about a minor inconvenience, remain quiet and continue with what needs to be done. These small moments give you repeated opportunities to practice choosing rather than reacting. You are not trying to become emotionless. You are training the ability to tolerate a desire without immediately obeying it. There will also be moments when the correct choice is to satisfy the desire. Delayed gratification should not become unnecessary deprivation. If you are genuinely hungry, eat. If you are exhausted, rest. If you need recreation, allow yourself recreation. Discipline requires judgment. The question is not whether you can deny yourself everything. The question is whether you can decide deliberately instead of allowing the strongest immediate urge to make the decision. Sometimes self-control means waiting. Sometimes it means accepting the reward without guilt because it fits your priorities. The Stoic perspective adds another useful distinction. Freedom does not mean getting everything you want whenever you want it. A person who needs immediate satisfaction can become dependent on circumstances remaining comfortable. A person who can wait has more flexibility. They can tolerate boredom without panic. They can experience disappointment without immediately searching for another reward. They can hear criticism without rushing to defend themselves. They can want something without becoming controlled by the desire for it. That kind of independence is valuable because it reduces the number of things that can dictate your behavior. As you practice waiting, you may discover something uncomfortable about certain desires. Some of them are not really about the thing you want. They are about the feeling you expect the thing to create. You may not want the purchase as much as you want excitement. You may not want the food as much as you want relief. You may not want the argument as much as you want validation. You may not want another hour of entertainment as much as you want to avoid thinking about tomorrow. Once you recognize the emotional need beneath the impulse, you have more options. You can address the real problem rather than repeatedly satisfying the surface desire. This is where stronger discipline begins to affect your sense of self. You start discovering that an urge can rise without controlling you. You can wait, you can reconsider, you can choose. Each time you do, you create evidence that your behavior does not have to follow your strongest immediate feeling. That does not make impulses disappear. It makes them less powerful as decision makers. But learning to delay rewards reveals another challenge. Sometimes the strongest impulses are not connected to possessions, food, entertainment, or spending. They are connected to emotion itself. Anger can demand a reaction. Fear can demand avoidance. Frustration can demand withdrawal. Anxiety can demand reassurance. When the emotional pressure becomes intense, waiting may no longer feel sufficient. You must learn how to experience strong emotions without allowing them to decide what you do next. That is where discipline becomes a test of emotional control. Chapter 6. Manage your emotions before temporary feelings dictate important decisions. There are moments when one emotion can make a decision seem obvious that would look completely different the next morning. Anger can make you want to end a relationship. Fear can make you reject an opportunity. Shame can make you withdraw from people who care about you. Frustration can make you quit something that still matters to you. Excitement can make you promise more than you can realistically deliver. The emotion is real, but the conclusion formed under its influence may not be reliable. Emotional discipline does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending to be calm when you are not. It means learning to experience an emotion without allowing its strongest moment to determine an important decision. Emotions serve a purpose. They tell you that something matters. Anger may signal that you believe a boundary has been crossed. Fear may indicate that you see a possible threat. Sadness may tell you that you have experienced a loss. Anxiety may reveal uncertainty that deserves attention. These signals can be useful, but a signal is not a complete analysis. If you become angry during an argument, your anger may tell you that something about the situation matters deeply to you. It does not automatically tell you who is right, what should be said, or what the relationship needs. The emotion provides information. Your judgment still has work to do. This distinction becomes difficult because strong emotions narrow your attention. When you are angry, you may focus almost entirely on what the other person did wrong. When you are afraid, your mind may search for evidence that confirms danger. When you are embarrassed, you may become highly focused on how you believe others see you. This narrowed attention can make one interpretation feel complete. You may forget the parts of the situation that do not support the emotion. That is one reason important decisions should often be delayed when emotional intensity is unusually high. You are not avoiding the issue. You are giving yourself a better chance to see the entire situation. Imagine receiving a critical email at the end of a difficult workday. You read the message and immediately feel disrespected. Your first thought is to respond firmly and explain everything the other person has done wrong. You begin writing a long response. Then you read it again and realize that you are trying to defend yourself rather than solve the problem. The email may have been poorly written, or perhaps the criticism was justified, or perhaps both sides misunderstood something. If you respond while anger is controlling your judgment, you may create a second problem that is harder to solve than the first. Waiting until your emotional intensity decreases gives you the opportunity to respond to the actual issue instead of responding only to how the message made you feel. One of the most useful habits in emotional discipline is learning to name what you are experiencing with accuracy. Instead of saying, "I feel terrible," identify the specific emotion. Are you disappointed, jealous, embarrassed, threatened, frustrated, lonely, rejected, or afraid? Specific language can change how you understand the experience. "I am angry because I feel ignored" gives you more information than "I am angry." Once you identify the emotion and the reason behind it, you can examine whether the interpretation is accurate. Perhaps you were actually ignored. Perhaps you expected attention that the other person did not realize you needed. Perhaps the situation touched an older insecurity. The emotion may be valid even when your explanation for it needs correction. Your body can also give you an early warning that emotional intensity is increasing. Your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your voice becomes faster or louder. You feel pressure in your chest or tension in your jaw. You become restless and want to act immediately. These physical signals can be useful because they appear before you have fully committed to a behavior. When you notice them, create distance from the situation if possible. Do not continue an argument simply because you believe leaving the conversation temporarily makes you weak. A short pause can protect the quality of your eventual response. This is particularly important in close relationships. People often say things during intense arguments that they would not say under calmer conditions. The desire to be understood can become a desire to hurt the other person. A partner makes a mistake, and instead of discussing the specific behavior, you bring up every previous mistake you can remember. A family member criticizes you, and you respond by attacking their character. A friend disappoints you, and you immediately threaten to end the friendship. These responses can provide a brief feeling of power or protection, but they often create consequences that remain after the emotion has passed. Emotional discipline asks a harder question: what response will I still respect tomorrow? Fear creates a different problem because it often encourages avoidance. You may receive an opportunity to take on greater responsibility and immediately imagine all the ways you could fail. You may avoid applying for a position because you assume someone more qualified will get it. You may avoid having an honest conversation because you expect conflict. You may stay in a situation that no longer serves you because uncertainty feels more frightening than dissatisfaction. Managing fear does not require convincing yourself that nothing bad will happen. It requires separating possible consequences from guaranteed consequences and deciding what action is reasonable despite uncertainty. Sadness can also influence decisions in subtle ways. When you are disappointed, you may conclude that something no longer matters. A failed relationship can make you believe that connection is not worth pursuing. A professional setback can make you question your abilities. A personal mistake can make you want to withdraw from everyone. These conclusions may feel honest because they match your current emotional state, but emotions change. A decision made during a period of sadness can permanently alter circumstances that would have felt different after recovery. Give major decisions enough time for the emotional intensity to become more stable. This does not mean postponing every decision whenever you feel something strongly. That would be impossible. Emotional maturity requires judgment about which decisions need distance. If a minor inconvenience makes you irritated, you can continue with your day. If you are furious and considering quitting your job, ending a relationship, making a major purchase, or sending a damaging message, a pause becomes much more important. The stronger the emotional consequence of the decision, the more valuable it is to give yourself time to reconsider. A useful question during emotional moments is, what problem am I actually trying to solve? If you are angry with someone, perhaps you want respect. If you are anxious, perhaps you want certainty. If you are jealous, perhaps you want reassurance about your own worth. If you are frustrated at work, perhaps you need a clearer expectation or a better system. The emotion may be demanding an immediate action, but the underlying need may require something different. Once you identify the real problem, you have more choices than simply acting on the first impulse. You should also become comfortable with the fact that emotional control does not always produce immediate emotional relief. Sometimes the responsible decision still feels bad. You may need to apologize while feeling embarrassed. You may need to accept criticism while feeling defensive. You may need to leave an unhealthy situation while feeling sad. You may need to continue working after losing confidence. Discipline is not proven by how quickly you can make yourself feel better. It is proven by whether you can behave according to your principles while difficult feelings are present. This is where resilience develops. You become less dependent on emotional comfort before taking responsible action. You learn that fear does not have to disappear before you speak. Disappointment does not have to disappear before you continue. Anger does not have to disappear before you listen. Uncertainty does not have to disappear before you decide. The goal is not to remove emotions from your life. The goal is to stop treating emotional comfort as a requirement for responsible behavior. The Stoic approach is especially useful because it separates what happens from what you do with what happens. Another person's opinion is outside your control. Your response to that opinion is within your influence. A rejection is outside your control. Whether you use it to improve is your responsibility. Someone may misunderstand you. You cannot force their interpretation, but you can communicate clearly and behave consistently. This perspective does not eliminate pain. It prevents pain from becoming an excuse for careless action. With practice, you may begin noticing a small but important change. The emotion still appears, but there is more space between feeling and behavior. You become less likely to send the message immediately, make the purchase immediately, quit immediately, or speak immediately. You become more capable of saying, "I am angry, but I do not need to decide this while angry." That sentence represents a meaningful level of self-command. You are acknowledging the feeling without handing it authority. Yet emotional discipline becomes much harder when you are tired, stressed, disappointed, and responsible for more than you can comfortably manage. In those moments, people often search for someone or something to blame because blame temporarily reduces the pressure of responsibility. It can feel easier to explain why your behavior was someone else's fault than to examine your own choices. But if you want deeper self-control, you eventually have to face that question directly. What part of your current situation belongs to you, even when accepting that responsibility is uncomfortable? That question leads to the next stage of discipline. Chapter 7. Eliminate excuses by taking full responsibility for your actions. It is easy to explain why something went wrong. Your schedule was difficult. Someone disappointed you. You did not have enough time. You were tired. The circumstances were unusual. Your parents did not teach you certain skills. Your manager made the situation harder. You were under too much pressure. Sometimes these explanations are completely accurate. Life does contain circumstances that make certain choices harder. The problem begins when an explanation becomes a reason to stop looking at your own responsibility. You can describe everything that influenced your behavior and still avoid the most important question: what was within my control and what did I choose to do with it? That question is uncomfortable because responsibility removes the protection of excuses. But it also gives you something valuable in return. It gives you a place from which change can begin. Taking responsibility does not mean pretending that circumstances do not matter. If you are working 2 jobs, caring for a family member, or dealing with an unexpected crisis, your available time and energy are different from someone else's. Responsibility is not a demand to judge yourself as if everyone begins from the same conditions. It is the willingness to examine your actual situation honestly and then identify the choices that remain available. You may not control how difficult your circumstances are, but you can often control whether you prepare, communicate, ask for help, adjust your expectations, or take the next reasonable action. This distinction protects you from 2 extremes: blaming yourself for everything and blaming everything except yourself. Excuses become powerful because they reduce discomfort immediately. If you fail to complete an important task and say, "I had too much going on," you may feel temporary relief. You do not have to examine whether you wasted time, failed to plan, or accepted too many unnecessary commitments. If you miss an opportunity and say, "They probably would not have chosen me anyway," you avoid facing the possibility that you were afraid to try. If you repeatedly lose control of your spending and say, "Everything is so expensive now," you may avoid examining the purchases that were actually within your control. An excuse can protect your self-image for a moment, but it often prevents useful learning. A responsible person does not need to make themselves the villain in every situation. Suppose you were treated unfairly at work. It would be dishonest to say that your own behavior caused another person's unfairness, but after acknowledging what happened, you still have choices. You can document the problem. You can speak to the appropriate person. You can set a boundary. You can search for another position. You can decide what response best protects your interests. The fact that another person acted badly does not remove your responsibility for what you do next. Responsibility is not the same as blame. Responsibility asks what you can do from this point forward. This becomes especially important when mistakes are involved. Imagine that you arrive late to an important meeting because you underestimated how long the journey would take. You could explain traffic, weather, parking, or other delays. Perhaps all of those factors were real. But if you knew the journey was unpredictable and still left too late, there is a decision you can examine. Next time, you can leave earlier. You can choose a different route. You can prepare in advance. You can accept that arriving early may be inconvenient. The useful response to a mistake is not endless self-criticism. It is identifying the specific behavior that should change. Specific responsibility is much more powerful than vague guilt. Saying, "I am terrible at managing my time," does not tell you what to improve. Saying, "I spent an hour watching videos before starting the task I had planned," gives you information. Saying, "I always make bad decisions," creates a negative identity. Saying, "I agreed to 3 commitments without checking my schedule," identifies a behavior. The more precise your language becomes, the easier it is to take practical action. Responsibility works best when it leads directly to a correction. There is also a common form of excuse that sounds responsible because it contains some truth. That is just how I am. You may say that you are naturally disorganized, impatient, emotional, distracted, or bad with money. These descriptions can feel harmless, but they can become permission to stop changing. A habit may be familiar without being permanent. Your past behavior explains what you have practiced, not what you are required to practice forever. When you say, "That is how I am," ask whether you are describing a fixed characteristic or simply a repeated pattern. If it is a pattern, it can be changed through different behavior. Other people can also become convenient explanations for your lack of progress. You may say that your partner does not support you, your friends distract you, your coworkers make everything difficult, or your family does not understand your goals. Sometimes these relationships genuinely create obstacles, but even then, responsibility asks what you have done about those obstacles. Have you communicated clearly? Have you established boundaries? Have you changed your schedule? Have you asked for support? Have you reduced unnecessary commitments? Have you accepted the consequences of avoiding a difficult conversation? Complaining about a situation may be justified, but it is not the same as changing it. One practical exercise is to remove the phrase "because they" from your internal explanation and replace it with "so I." Instead of saying, "They keep interrupting me, so I cannot focus," ask, "They keep interrupting me, so what can I change about my availability, communication, or environment?" Instead of, "My job is stressful, so I cannot exercise," ask, "My job is stressful, so when can I realistically exercise?" This does not deny the difficulty. It moves your attention toward the part of the situation where action is possible. The goal is not to make every problem your fault. The goal is to stop treating every problem as someone else's responsibility to solve. Responsibility also applies to promises you make to yourself. If you repeatedly decide that you will exercise, study, save money, or complete important work, and then ignore those decisions, the issue is not only productivity. You are teaching yourself how seriously your own commitments should be taken. Each time you follow through, you strengthen trust in your own word. Each time you repeatedly abandon a reasonable commitment without reconsidering it honestly, you weaken that trust. This does not mean you should never change your plans. Sometimes circumstances genuinely require adjustment. The important difference is whether you consciously revise the commitment or simply abandon it when it becomes inconvenient. There is another subtle form of avoidance: waiting for perfect conditions before accepting responsibility. You tell yourself that once work becomes easier, you will become disciplined. Once you have more money, you will manage it better. Once you feel confident, you will take action. Once your schedule becomes calmer, you will start exercising. But life rarely becomes permanently calm. New responsibilities appear, problems change, energy rises and falls. If your behavior depends on perfect conditions, you are giving circumstances too much authority over your life. Responsibility means asking what is reasonable under the conditions you actually have. This does not require harshness. In fact, excessive self-criticism can become another form of avoidance. If you spend hours feeling guilty about a mistake but never change the behavior, the guilt has not produced responsibility. It has only produced emotional discomfort. A responsible response is usually quieter. You acknowledge what happened, you identify your contribution, you decide what should change, you make the correction, then you continue. There is no need to repeatedly punish yourself for information you have already learned. The Stoic perspective is useful because it keeps responsibility connected to action. You cannot rewrite yesterday. You cannot control whether another person admits their mistake. You cannot force an opportunity to return. You cannot change the conditions under which a past decision was made. But you can examine what you learnt and decide how to behave now. This makes responsibility practical rather than emotional. You do not need to feel powerful before acting responsibly. You need to identify the next action that belongs to you and take it. Over time, taking responsibility changes the questions you ask. Instead of, "Why does this always happen to me?" you begin asking, "What pattern is my behavior contributing to?" Instead of, "Why does nobody help me?" you ask, "Have I clearly asked for what I need?" Instead of, "Why can I never stay consistent?" you ask, "Which part of my routine repeatedly breaks down?" Instead of, "Why am I so unlucky?" you ask, "What decisions can I improve?" These questions may not always feel comfortable, but they are useful because they lead toward action. The deeper benefit is that responsibility gives you back influence over your own life. You stop waiting for someone else to change before you begin changing what you can. You stop requiring ideal circumstances before taking action. You become more willing to admit mistakes because admitting them no longer feels like a complete judgment of your character. It becomes information, and information, when accepted honestly, can improve your decisions. But responsibility creates another demand. Once you accept that your choices matter, you have to decide where those choices should be directed. It is possible to take responsibility for everything and still spend your energy on tasks that do not deserve it. You can be extremely responsible and still allow minor demands to consume your best hours. You can keep every promise to everyone else while repeatedly neglecting the commitments that matter most to you. The next stage of discipline requires learning how to protect your time and focus so that responsibility is directed toward the right priorities. Chapter 8: Strengthen your focus by choosing priorities and protecting your time. You can be responsible, disciplined, and hard-working while still spending your life on things that matter very little. Many people are not failing because they refuse to work. They are failing because they keep responding to whatever demands their attention first. An email arrives, so they answer it. Someone asks for a favor, so they rearrange their schedule. A small problem appears, so they solve it immediately. A new opportunity appears, so they add it to an already crowded calendar. At the end of the day, they feel exhausted because they have done many things, but the important things remain unfinished. This is the problem of priorities. Time is not only something you manage, it is something you assign. Every hour given to one responsibility is an hour unavailable for another. The difficulty is that most tasks do not announce their true importance. An unanswered message can feel urgent because someone is waiting. A long meeting can feel important because several people are involved. A small administrative task can feel productive because it can be completed quickly. Meanwhile, the work that could significantly improve your future may be quiet and demanding. Learning a valuable skill may take months. Building a business may require years. Improving a relationship may require uncomfortable conversations. Taking care of your health may require consistent choices that produce no immediate recognition. Because important work often lacks immediate pressure, it is easy to postpone it while handling smaller demands. This is why you need a clear definition of priority. A priority is not simply something you would like to accomplish. It is something you are willing to protect time for. If improving your health is important, but you never reserve time for exercise, then health may be a value, but it is not yet a practical priority. If spending time with your family matters, but your schedule regularly gives that time away to less important activities, your behavior is communicating something different from your intentions. Your priorities become visible through the way you allocate your limited time, not through the statements you make about what matters. A useful exercise is to identify what would genuinely matter if you looked back at the next year. Not every task on your current list deserves equal weight. Some responsibilities maintain your life, others improve it, others are simply requests that arrived from outside. Ask yourself which activities create meaningful progress, which prevent serious problems, and which could be reduced, delegated, delayed, or removed. This exercise can be uncomfortable because choosing priorities means accepting that some things will not receive your full attention. You cannot do everything well. Saying yes to everything often means saying yes without enough time to do anything properly. Imagine that you have a full-time job, family responsibilities, personal goals, and several social commitments. You decide that you want to study for a professional qualification. The study requires 5 hours each week. If you simply add those 5 hours to your existing schedule, you may create an impossible workload. The real question is not where you can find 5 extra hours. It is what you are willing to reduce in order to make room for something you have decided matters. Perhaps you watch less television. Perhaps you attend fewer optional events. Perhaps you stop volunteering for tasks that others can handle. Priority requires trade-offs because time does not expand when your ambitions increase. This is where many people struggle emotionally. They want the freedom to pursue new goals without giving anything up. They want better health without changing their evenings. They want professional growth without reducing entertainment. They want stronger relationships without protecting time for people. They want financial stability without changing spending habits. But every meaningful priority has a cost. Sometimes the cost is comfort. Sometimes it is convenience. Sometimes it is saying no. Sometimes it is accepting that other people may not understand why you are less available. Discipline means being willing to pay the appropriate cost for what you claim matters. Protecting your time also requires boundaries. A boundary is not an attempt to control other people. It is a decision about what you will and will not make available. If someone regularly calls during the period you reserve for focused work, you can tell them when you are available instead. If coworkers repeatedly bring minor questions while you are completing important work, you can establish a time when you will handle those questions together. If friends expect immediate responses to every message, you can stop treating instant replies as an obligation. You do not need to become rude or distant. You simply need to stop allowing constant access to your attention. There is a psychological reason saying no can feel difficult. Humans naturally care about social approval. When someone asks for help, refusing can create guilt. You may worry that they will think you are selfish. You may fear missing an opportunity. You may believe that being useful means being available whenever someone asks. But if you repeatedly accept commitments that conflict with your important responsibilities, the person who ultimately pays the cost is you. Saying no to a low-priority request can be a way of saying yes to a responsibility you already accepted. The goal is not to become less generous. It is to become more deliberate about what you agree to. Another important skill is distinguishing between urgent and important. Urgent tasks demand attention because there is a deadline or immediate consequence. Important tasks contribute to long-term outcomes even when nobody is demanding them today. Paying an overdue bill may be urgent. Learning how to manage your finances may be important. Responding to a work emergency may be urgent. Developing a skill that improves your career may be important. A disciplined life cannot be built by responding only to urgency. If you do that, your days become controlled by whatever problem appears next. One practical solution is to decide the most important outcome for the day before opening yourself to other people's demands. This does not mean ignoring necessary responsibilities. It means giving your most valuable work a protected place before the day becomes crowded. If the task requires concentration, do it during the part of the day when your mind is strongest. If you have a difficult conversation to prepare for, give it time before exhaustion makes avoidance more attractive. If you need to work on a long-term goal, schedule it rather than hoping you will find spare time. You also need to examine how often you use your best mental energy on low-value activities. Some people spend their mornings checking messages, browsing news, and handling minor administrative work, then attempt their most difficult task when their attention is already depleted. The problem is not that those smaller tasks are useless, it is that they are receiving the best part of the day, while important work receives whatever energy remains. Reverse that order when possible. Protect your strongest hours for work that requires your strongest thinking. There will be days when priorities compete. Family needs may conflict with professional responsibilities. A health issue may interrupt your plans. An unexpected problem may require immediate attention. This is why priorities should not become rigid rules. You need judgment. Ask what consequence matters most, what responsibility is most immediate, and what can reasonably wait. The goal is not perfect balance every day. Some periods of life will demand more from one area than another. The goal is to make those choices consciously, instead of allowing the loudest demand to make them for you. A disciplined approach to time also includes rest. If you treat every hour as an opportunity for work, you may eventually damage your ability to think clearly and perform consistently. Rest becomes part of responsible time management when it allows you to recover and continue. But rest should be different from uncontrolled avoidance. You can deliberately decide to spend an evening relaxing without feeling guilty. You can take time away from work because recovery is necessary. The key is that the decision is intentional. You are not losing time because you cannot control your behavior. You are using time for a reason. Your calendar can reveal something about your priorities that your thoughts may hide. Look at the last 7 days and ask where your time actually went. Do not judge the answer immediately. Observe it. How much time went to work? How much went to entertainment? How much went to relationships? How much went to health? How much went to learning? How much disappeared into unplanned activities? This exercise can be uncomfortable because your actual schedule may not match the person you believe you are trying to become, but that mismatch is useful information. You cannot improve what you refuse to examine. The Stoic perspective reminds you that time is one of the few resources you cannot recover once it has been used. Money can sometimes be earned again. A missed opportunity may sometimes return. Lost time does not. This does not mean living with anxiety about every hour. It means treating your time with enough respect to decide where it should go. You do not need to maximize productivity. You need to stop giving your limited time away without thought. As you become clearer about your priorities, another benefit appears. Your mind becomes quieter because fewer decisions compete for attention. You know what deserves your effort. You know what can wait. You know what you are willing to decline. You become less vulnerable to the pressure of doing everything immediately. This creates a different kind of confidence because you are no longer measuring your worth by how many demands you can satisfy. But protecting your time creates a new test. Knowing what matters is one thing. Protecting it when pressure increases is another. Anyone can follow priorities when the day is calm. The real test comes when you are tired, criticized, tempted, behind schedule, or facing an unexpected problem. In those moments, the mind often searches for the easiest response rather than the most important one. The next chapter will examine how to maintain discipline when motivation disappears and pressure makes your carefully chosen priorities difficult to follow. Chapter 9: Practice discipline under pressure when motivation becomes unreliable. There is a version of discipline that works easily when life is organized. You sleep well, your schedule is manageable, your responsibilities are under control, and you feel confident about what you need to do. Then something changes. You receive unexpected criticism at work. A family problem demands your attention. You sleep badly for several nights. A project falls behind. Money becomes tight. Someone disappoints you. Suddenly the routines that seemed easy become difficult. This is where many people discover that their discipline depended more on favorable conditions than they realized. Pressure reveals whether your behavior is based on a genuine commitment or simply on how comfortable you happen to feel. The goal is not to perform perfectly during difficult periods. The goal is to remain capable of making responsible choices when motivation becomes unreliable. Motivation is useful, but it is unstable. It changes with sleep, stress, confidence, health, environment, and recent experiences. You may feel highly motivated after watching something inspiring, then lose that feeling 2 days later. You may begin a project with excitement and discover that the middle is repetitive and difficult. You may care deeply about a goal and still have mornings when you do not want to work on it. If your actions depend on feeling motivated first, your consistency will always be vulnerable. Discipline becomes stronger when you stop requiring the right emotional state before doing what needs to be done. Pressure creates another psychological problem because it narrows your ability to think clearly. When you feel overwhelmed, the mind tends to focus on the most immediate problem. You may want to finish everything at once, respond to everyone immediately, or solve the entire situation before allowing yourself to rest. This often creates more mistakes. A better response is to reduce the problem to the next responsible action. If a project is seriously behind, determine what must be completed first. If several bills are due, identify which requires immediate attention. If a difficult conversation is unavoidable, decide what you need to communicate clearly. Pressure becomes easier to manage when you stop demanding that everything be solved at the same time. Consider a person who receives several negative comments from a supervisor after months of strong performance. The immediate emotional response may be embarrassment, anger, or fear about losing the job. Under pressure, that person might become defensive, stop communicating, or begin working frantically without understanding the actual problem. A disciplined response would be different. First, separate the emotional reaction from the practical issue. Then ask what criticism is specific, what needs clarification, and what can be improved. The pressure remains, but the response becomes more organized. This is what self-control looks like when circumstances are not comfortable. Pressure also tests whether you can preserve minimum standards. During difficult periods, you may not be able to maintain your ideal routine. That does not mean you must abandon every useful behavior. If you normally exercise for an hour but have an unusually demanding week, perhaps a short walk is realistic. If you normally study for 2 hours but have a family emergency, perhaps you review for 15 minutes when circumstances allow. If you normally cook every meal but are exhausted, choose a simple meal rather than immediately abandoning your health goals. The point is not to maintain maximum performance at all times. It is to prevent temporary difficulty from becoming an excuse to stop caring for the areas that matter. This idea is important because perfection can quietly damage discipline. Someone misses a planned workout and decides the week is ruined. Someone eats poorly at lunch and decides they will restart their diet next month. Someone loses focus during the morning and decides the entire day is wasted. This all-or-nothing thinking creates unnecessary damage. A mistake becomes larger because the person responds to it with another mistake. A disciplined person learns to recover quickly. The question is not whether the day went perfectly. The question is what the next reasonable choice is. You should also prepare for predictable periods of low motivation. If you know that winter affects your energy, work becomes especially demanding at certain times of the year, or your schedule becomes chaotic during particular weeks, do not wait until the pressure arrives to decide how you will respond. Create simpler expectations in advance. Identify the habits that are most important to preserve. Decide what can temporarily be reduced. Tell yourself that during difficult periods, the objective is stability rather than maximum progress. Preparation reduces the shock that comes when life stops cooperating with your preferred routine. Another important skill is learning to distinguish discomfort from danger. When a task feels difficult, your mind may interpret that discomfort as a reason to stop. But discomfort can come from many sources. It may mean that you are tired. It may mean that the task is unfamiliar. It may mean that you are afraid of making a mistake. It may simply mean that the activity requires sustained effort. Not every unpleasant feeling indicates that something is wrong. Before stopping, ask what kind of discomfort you are experiencing. If the task is genuinely harmful or unreasonable, adjust. If the discomfort is simply the normal cost of meaningful effort, continuing may be the appropriate choice. Pressure can also reveal whether your identity depends too heavily on success. If you believe you are disciplined only when you perform well, a failure can damage your confidence. You may begin avoiding challenging situations because failure would threaten your sense of self. A stronger approach is to define discipline by the quality of your response to difficulty. You can lose a competition and still behave with discipline. You can receive criticism and still behave with discipline. You can fail at a project and still respond responsibly. Your result matters, but your response to the result also matters. This becomes especially valuable when circumstances are outside your control. You may prepare carefully and still lose the opportunity. You may communicate respectfully and still be misunderstood. You may work hard and still face financial difficulties. You may make healthy choices and still experience setbacks. If your discipline depends on receiving the outcome you wanted, you will become discouraged whenever reality does not cooperate. The Stoic approach is more stable. Judge yourself by what you controlled: your preparation, honesty, effort, patience, and response. The result may be disappointing, but it does not have to determine the quality of your character. There is also a practical way to train discipline under pressure before serious pressure arrives. Introduce small challenges deliberately. Wake up without immediately checking your phone. Finish an uncomfortable task before doing something entertaining. Take a walk when you would normally sit down and scroll. Have a difficult conversation instead of postponing it. Complete your planned workout even when the session feels less enjoyable than expected. These experiences teach you that temporary discomfort does not have to dictate behavior. You are building familiarity with choosing responsibility when the easier option is available. However, discipline under pressure does not mean refusing help. Some people confuse self-control with handling everything alone. That can create unnecessary strain. Asking for assistance can be a responsible decision when the problem exceeds what you can reasonably manage. If your workload is too large, communicate early. If you do not understand something, ask a useful question. If you are struggling with a responsibility, seek appropriate support. Pride can disguise itself as independence. True responsibility includes recognizing when another person's knowledge, time, or assistance can improve the situation. Communication becomes especially important under pressure because stress can make people withdraw or react aggressively. If you know that you are becoming overwhelmed, communicate before the situation becomes a crisis. Tell your colleague that a deadline may need adjustment. Tell your family that you need a period of quiet to complete an important task. Explain clearly when you cannot take on another commitment. People cannot respond to needs they do not understand. Discipline includes managing expectations rather than silently allowing pressure to build. You should also protect basic physical needs during stressful periods. Sleep, food, movement, and recovery are not luxuries that become irrelevant when life becomes difficult. Poor sleep can make emotional control harder. Exhaustion can reduce patience. Hunger can increase irritability. Long periods without movement can increase physical tension. When pressure rises, people often remove the very behaviors that help them handle pressure. They sleep less to gain more work time, skip meals, stop exercising, and remain connected to screens late into the night. The result can be reduced capacity the next day. Protecting your basic functioning is part of responsible performance. The deeper lesson is that discipline should become flexible without becoming weak. You need enough structure to maintain your commitments and enough judgment to adapt when circumstances change. You should know which standards are essential and which are optional. You should know when to push and when to recover. You should know when discomfort deserves persistence and when it signals that something needs to change. This judgment develops through experience. You become better at it when you stop evaluating yourself only by whether you succeeded and start examining how you responded when success was uncertain. Eventually, pressure becomes less frightening because you have evidence that you can function while uncomfortable. You have seen yourself continue after disappointment. You have seen yourself recover after mistakes. You have learned that a difficult day does not require a destructive decision. You have learned that motivation can disappear without taking your responsibilities with it. That is a stronger form of confidence because it is based on behavior rather than emotion. But there is one final challenge. A disciplined person can become very good at controlling attention, managing impulses, following routines, accepting responsibility, and working under pressure, yet still move in the wrong direction. Discipline by itself does not tell you what deserves your discipline. You can become highly efficient while pursuing goals that do not reflect the life you actually want. You can become excellent at keeping yourself busy while neglecting meaning, relationships, health, or personal values. The final step is therefore not simply becoming more disciplined. It is learning how to direct your disciplined mind toward a life you have consciously chosen. Chapter 10. Direct your disciplined mind toward the life you intentionally choose. Discipline can change your life, but discipline alone cannot tell you what kind of life you should build. You can wake early, work long hours, manage your schedule carefully, control your spending, and complete every task on time while moving toward a life that does not actually satisfy you. You can become extremely efficient at reaching goals that were chosen because they impressed other people, because they were expected of you, or because you were afraid of falling behind. This is why the final purpose of discipline is not control for its own sake. The purpose is to gain enough control over your thoughts, time, emotions, and behavior that you can make deliberate choices about what deserves your effort. A disciplined mind should not simply ask, "How much can I accomplish?" It should also ask, "What is worth accomplishing?" Many people discover this question only after achieving something they once wanted badly. They receive the promotion and realize that the job consumes every part of their life. They increase their income and discover that their spending increased with it. They become successful professionally while becoming distant from their family. They build a strong public image while privately feeling exhausted and disconnected. These outcomes do not always happen because the person made terrible decisions. Sometimes they simply continued pursuing goals without regularly asking whether those goals still matched their values. Life changes, your responsibilities change, your understanding of yourself changes. A goal that mattered deeply at 25 may not deserve the same priority at 35. Intentional living requires the courage to review your direction rather than continuing simply because you have already invested so much. A useful place to begin is with values rather than goals. A goal has an endpoint. You may want to earn a certain amount of money, reach a particular position, complete a degree, or purchase a home. A value describes how you want to behave while pursuing those goals. You may value honesty, responsibility, learning, family, health, independence, service, or personal growth. Values help you make decisions when two goals compete. Suppose accepting a promotion would increase your income but require constant travel that conflicts with a responsibility you consider deeply important. The question is not simply whether the promotion is good. The question is whether accepting it fits the kind of person and life you are trying to build. This becomes practical when you examine your calendar and spending rather than your intentions. If you say family matters but spend every evening working, your schedule contains information about your actual priorities. If you say health matters but consistently sacrifice sleep for entertainment, your behavior reveals a different priority. If you say financial freedom matters but regularly purchase things to impress people, your spending tells another story. This is not an invitation to judge yourself harshly. It is an opportunity to become honest. Your life is being shaped by repeated choices, whether you examine them or not. Intentional living begins when you compare those choices with what you claim to value. You should also become careful about borrowed goals. Society constantly provides definitions of success: more money, a better position, a larger home, more followers, more recognition, more possessions, more achievement. None of these things is automatically bad. The problem occurs when you pursue them without deciding whether they actually matter to you. You may spend years trying to prove that you are successful because you are afraid of being seen as ordinary. You may work excessively because you believe slowing down means falling behind. You may compete with people who are pursuing completely different lives. Discipline can make borrowed goals more dangerous because it gives you the ability to pursue them very efficiently. Ask yourself what you would continue doing if nobody knew about it. Would you still want to learn the skill? Would you still want the position? Would you still want the expensive purchase? Would you still want the lifestyle? This question removes some of the pressure created by external approval. It does not mean other people's opinions are irrelevant. Relationships and social responsibilities matter, but your entire direction should not depend on being admired by people who may not understand your circumstances or values. Intentional choice also requires accepting limits. You have limited time, energy, money, attention, and physical capacity. You cannot maximize every area simultaneously. If you decide to become deeply committed to your career during a certain period, something else may receive less attention. If you prioritize raising a family, you may have less flexibility for professional opportunities. If you focus on improving your health, you may need to reduce habits that interfere with recovery. This is not a failure of balance. It is the reality of having limited resources. The important question is whether you choose the trade-offs consciously. There is freedom in accepting these limits because you no longer need to pursue everything. A disciplined person can say, "That opportunity is good, but it is not right for me right now." They can admire another person's lifestyle without needing to copy it. They can recognize that a certain achievement would be impressive, but still decline it because the cost is inconsistent with their priorities. This kind of decision may be difficult because every choice closes some alternatives, but refusing to choose does not preserve every possibility. It usually means circumstances will choose for you. You should also distinguish between a life that looks successful and a life that feels coherent. Coherence means that your actions make sense in relation to your values. If you value family but build a schedule that leaves no room for family, something is inconsistent. If you value honesty but regularly hide important information to protect your image, something is inconsistent. If you value health but organize your life around habits that continually damage it, something is inconsistent. These contradictions create internal tension because you are repeatedly acting against what you say matters. Discipline can help resolve that tension by bringing behavior closer to intention. This process requires regular review. Once a year, or whenever your circumstances change significantly, step back and examine the direction of your life. Ask what is working, what is costing too much, what you have outgrown, and what you have been avoiding. Look at your relationships, work, finances, health, learning, and use of time. You do not need to redesign everything. Often, 1 or 2 changes are enough to correct your direction. The purpose of reflection is not to become obsessed with self-improvement. It is to prevent years of automatic behavior from passing without examination. Your definition of success should also include how you behave when nobody is rewarding you. It is easy to be disciplined when the result is visible and praise is available. The deeper test is whether you remain honest when dishonesty would be easier, responsible when nobody is checking, patient when you could react, and committed when progress is slow. These behaviors may not produce immediate recognition, but they determine the quality of your character. A life intentionally chosen cannot depend entirely on external rewards, because external rewards are outside your control. This is where the Stoic view of life becomes especially useful. You can work toward meaningful outcomes while accepting that outcomes are never completely guaranteed. You can prepare carefully for a career opportunity without making your self-respect dependent on receiving it. You can invest in relationships without controlling how others respond. You can care for your health without assuming that every effort will produce perfect results. You can pursue financial stability while recognizing that circumstances can change. The discipline lies in doing your part well while maintaining enough perspective to accept what remains outside your control. There is also a need for courage because intentional choices often require disappointing someone. Your family may have expectations, your friends may have opinions, your workplace may reward behavior that conflicts with your personal priorities. Someone may question why you are changing. If your decisions are based entirely on approval, you will eventually surrender important parts of your life to other people's preferences. This does not mean ignoring everyone. It means being willing to listen without automatically obeying. A mature decision considers other people's needs while still accepting responsibility for your own direction. Perhaps the most important question you can ask is whether your daily behavior is moving you toward a life you would willingly continue living. Not a perfect life, not a life without difficulty, not a life that looks impressive from the outside, a life that reflects your chosen values. If your answer is no, you do not need to change everything immediately. Start by identifying the smallest repeated behavior that contradicts your direction. Then change that behavior. A different life is usually built through repeated decisions, not one dramatic decision. The discipline you have developed throughout this journey becomes meaningful when it gives you the ability to live according to those decisions. You can control your attention instead of giving it away. You can challenge thoughts instead of obeying them. You can establish routines instead of relying on motivation. You can delay rewards instead of surrendering to impulses. You can manage emotions without allowing them to dictate your behavior. You can accept responsibility without hiding behind excuses. You can protect your priorities and continue acting responsibly under pressure. These abilities are not the final destination. They are what make intentional choice possible. But choosing your direction does not mean you will never doubt yourself. There will be periods when you question your goals, lose confidence, experience failure, or discover that a decision needs to change. Discipline should never become a refusal to reconsider. Sometimes changing direction is the responsible choice. Sometimes continuing is the responsible choice. The challenge is learning the difference. That requires ongoing honesty, reflection, and courage. So as you move forward, do not measure your discipline only by how much you can force yourself to do. Measure it by how deliberately you choose what deserves to be done. A controlled mind is not simply a mind that says no. It is a mind capable of saying yes for the right reasons, no for the right reasons, and not yet when patience is required. Your time will continue passing regardless of how carefully you plan it. Your circumstances will continue changing regardless of how prepared you are. The question that remains is not whether life will influence you. It will. The deeper question is whether you will continue examining your choices closely enough to decide which influences deserve a place in the life you are building.